All right, everybody. Scott Golden here with Pro Wrestling Logic, and I want to apologize for not getting audios up over the weekend, but there were some problems with the YouTube uploading system. I was getting error messages, and it wasn't putting the audios through. So there's going to be a flood of content over the next couple of days, probably close to 10 or 15 audios in total. At least I'm thinking. We are going to cover Raw tonight. Today is the 4th of May. May the 4th be with you. 2020, and all the weekend stuff going to go up today, hopefully, or if not, definitely by tomorrow. Raw review will be up tonight, late, or tomorrow morning. And anyhow, so hope you're doing well. Today we're going to cover a bunch of the TNT series as requested by a audio listener, and if you would like to make a request yourself, please feel free to do so. This is the June 26th, 1984 edition of TNT. If you're not familiar with TNT, it's kind of an interesting trip. Much more personality profiles than actual wrestling. I wish they were doing more of this on Raw and SmackDown today, at least one or two segments a week of it. I think it would add depth to characters rather than just moves, but that's just me. So we open the show with a rundown of what we're going to see, but then we move on to Jimmy Snuka. Jimmy Snuka is embroidered in a feud with Roddy Piper at the time. Obviously, this is around the time of the coconut incident where Snuka is permanently brain damaged with Roddy Piper using a coconut over his head. If you have not seen that, if you're a newer fan that wasn't around in the 80s, go out of your way to search Piper's Pit Jimmy Snuka. Iconic angle, probably one of the ones that to this day I can still watch that and get chills down my spine just with how intense that was. It made you wonder, is what I'm seeing real? Anyway, Snuka, and I'd like to ask our older audience members who have been around longer than I have as a fan. My first exposure to Snuka as a fan, first run content, was 1989 when he returned right around the WrestleMania 5 time frame. But for those who knew Jimmy before that, did he ever cut a coherent promo? I know at one point we're going to go back and do the 1982 run that he had, but I haven't gotten there yet. Never seen that stuff. It'll be first run for me as I watch it. So, did he ever cut a coherent promo? Because basically, you hear him mumble about having the truth, having the truth, brother, and always know what your truth is. And then we see the Piper incident, and he screams unintelligibly. If you want a savage individual, and Jimmy Snuka was good at that. I remember seeing a 1982-83 promo right around the famous Don Morocco cage match, which is again required viewing for anyone who hasn't seen it. And obviously everybody's probably seen it in clips. Snuka off the top of the cage from the October of 83 match, at which Mick Foley was present. But anyhow, I remember seeing a pre-match for that where Snuka was very unintelligible and was throwing chairs all around. So I'm curious if Jimmy Snuka has ever cut an intelligible promo in his life. If so, I'd be interested to see it because I haven't seen it before. From there, we move on to McMahon and Al Hayes interviewing Lou Thesz. Lou Thesz, of course, one of the inaugural NWA champions. Thesz, by this point, had phased out of wrestling on a national level, picking up some referee gigs, primarily in St. Louis and NWA territories. Was doing a bit of international touring. His last match in 1990, I believe, with Masachono in Japan. But, I mean, you're talking about Lou being very old, multi-time, 6 or 7-time NWA champion. Also talking about raising animals and showing belts and awards that he's received over the years. Really, if you like historic pieces and you like the idea of a champion who makes you kind of wonder about the early impetus of MMA being infused in pro wrestling. Obviously, there were guys before Lou, but Lou kind of is a guy who bridges the gap. They do show some black and white footage of Lou, and, you know, just worth checking out. This is in 2 segments, in between which we'll move on to the next segment, in between which is a Paul Office Paul Orndorff, yeah, Paul Office, sure. Paul Orndorff visit to the hair salon, and I mean, he's complaining about how his nails are done, complaining about how his hair is done, complaining about deserving more credit, complaining about all sorts of things. Um, and just really showing a very livid side, almost a bipolar. No offense to anyone who has the bipolar diagnosis, but just a very angry, vicious, mentally unstable, emotionally unstable side. I can see where this would be a draw to people that liked Orndorff. When I see him in matches, though, I think he's very punch kick. While I understand punch kick for guys like, for example, Bruno Sammartino and Pedro Morales, by 1984, I'd be expecting a little bit more in terms of variety of offensive maneuvers for a guy to hold my attention. Now, by 86, 87, well, more so 86, especially with the Hogan run, I do like those matches, but just, I think Orndorff, for me, is a guy who has to have somebody to bring things out of him. He's not good in a squash match environment, at least not in my opinion. Now, we move on to Murdoch and Adonis versus S.G. Jones and Mil Mascaras. Mil Mascaras, probably outside of El Santo, one of the biggest names in Mexico. I won't even say biggest wrestlers. I'll say biggest names in Mexico in terms of entertainment for several decades. I did not realize that he was part of the World Wrestling Federation expansion. I'd be interested to know where this match took place. Several innovative moves for the time: head scissors, planches, satellite head scissors, arm drags of a more international flavor and flair. Jones really, perennial, I won't say perennial jobber by this point, but certainly a guy who, and let me correct that, perennial carpenter. Um, certainly not a guy that a lot of people are believing a whole great deal in. Very good match. Adonis at this point, years away from his feud with Piper, has not transitioned into the more effeminate, adorable Adrian role yet. And this is my first time to go in and well, maybe not my first time. I've seen clips of Murdoch and Adonis before, but I don't think I've ever seen this much of a match at the time. Anyhow, we move on to Vince McMahon paying tribute to his father, Vince J. McMahon. Now, I will not call him Senior because technically Vincent Kennedy McMahon is his son, but Senior would imply they had the same first and middle name, and the misnomer of calling him Junior is not factually accurate. Anyhow, Vince paying tribute as his father is inducted into the Madison Square Garden Hall of Fame. I know this is going to sound weird, especially with how against the current WWE product I am now, but if you've ever wanted to see Vince in a more humanistic way, if you've ever wanted to see him almost humbled by something, or awestruck, or inspired, or just a more well-balanced human side, go out of your way to watch this clip. It's only a couple minutes long. You can see him at times look like he's about to tear up when talking about his dad. His dad impresses upon him the benefits of the garden. And Vince is very sympathetic with his father having passed away from cancer mere weeks, if not maybe a month or two, before this particular segment was filmed. If there's one thing in this TNT episode that I think fans should go see, it's this segment, just because I think it sheds light on Vince in a different way that many, certainly almost all fans that have been around for, let's say, 98 to now, right, have not seen him. So fans in the last 20, almost, let's round off, make it easy, 25 years, haven't seen Vince in this manner. Morocco joins the show. Morocco's another guy that has a lot of supporters. Obviously, his feud with Snooker a big deal. He comes back later in the 80s with a babyface push, 87, 88, managed by Billy Graham. He never clicked with me. I know there are people that love his meatball sandwich eating, his Subway sandwich eating deal. He didn't click with me. Um, Very melancholy one note promo here. Goes into a match with Tony Garea managed by Mr. Fuji. The match is really nothing to write home about. Obviously, Muraku takes the victory here. We then move on to Ivan Putski. Putski talks about muscles, talks about Polish nature and culture and costumes and food. And we watch Vince McMahon, who, one thing I like, I like about these old TNT shows, if you ever think that today's fashion styles are nuts in 2020, please go back and watch some of these early TNT shows and even Superstars when Vince is doing commentary in the late 80s, early 90s. And some of the color choices for the suits he wears. Good golly. There's like this checkered suit that he's wearing. As I press pause on this, be back in a minute. All right, and we pick up where we left off there. Work calls. But anyway, for folks who are still here, my apologies. Some say edit that out, others say whatever. But anyhow, not me. I'm human, and I'm going to leave it in. In any event, so Putski joins the show. He talks about culture, talks about, his nature. He's a former tag team champion. Talks a little bit about that. Putski against Ron Shaw. We see very basic power-related moves. Reminds me a lot in move set sort of ways of what do you call it? The Ultimate Warrior. Just a very muscular guy who is just kind of there, and he's not that big a deal, but he's over with the fans. We see him in a match with Ron Shaw clipped. He uses power, and then we see him dancing, talking about his babushka, which is basically, talking about his woman. Lots to this segment, multifaceted. Not a guy that really gets over with me, but I understand why he got over with the crowds in the 80s. And really just fascinating to watch that, just being human, being real, being yes, he's a power lifter, but being real and being human. I think helped to get him over with the crowd in a dynamic way. And then we move on to, let me go here. Then we move on to his adversary at the time, Jesse the Body Ventura. Of course, Jesse the Governor Ventura, later the governor of Minnesota, mayor of Brooklyn Park during the late 80s into the early 90s. Very polarizing figure. Current news, he's trying to get a nomination for the Green Party, etc. and so forth. Ventura talks about being bodyguard for the Rolling Stones, talks about being one of the best, calls out Hogan, really goes off on McMahon for calling him Jack McMahon, calls Ivan Putski Paduski, same type of guy who calls Tito Santana Chico. Jesse is probably, I would say, neck and neck with my favorite color guy, Bobby Heenan. So, they're A and 1A, and depending on the day, you'll get a different response from me as far as who's there. Now, we go to a match with him and SD Jones. SD shows up a lot on these early TNT programs. I think it's because he's a utility guy, former tag team champion, just a guy all around who's really, worth kind of investing in. He has enough clout with the fans that there's a thought that he may win, but not enough to where he actually does very often. Ventura talks about his hair in the second part of the segment, talks about being fashionable, talks about everybody being jealous, again, wants to take Hogan out. Of course, they have a history from the AWA days, and that's that. Then there's a segment that I really feel no need to cover where they just do highlights of matches. I don't like the chopped up version of matches on TNT. I'm a completist. I've mentioned this before. If you are too, please comment below. But overall, other than the McMahon segment, and maybe you might like the Jesse Ventura interviews, really kind of a skippable show as far as TNT is concerned. I'll be back momentarily with the next show. I don't know why they're every 2 weeks. If someone was around at the time when they aired originally, 30 plus years ago, maybe you could speak to why they're every 2 weeks. They do later, I think, in sometime in '85, go to weekly, but these first 1984 shows are every other week. So maybe you could maybe it's a scheduling issue. I don't know. I'd be really interested to find out somebody who knows more than I do. In any event, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Scott Golden with Pro Wrestling Logic reminding you keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment, and have a good day, everybody.